So 10% of Texas's grid is run by nuclear. I had no idea that we had any nuclear going on here. Like,
Yeah. We have South Texas Project, which is down south in Bay City or near Bay City. And then we have Comanche Peak, that's up north near a large body of water near Dallas, Fort Worth Metroplex.
why was Texas able to keep those going during like the nuclear freeze that's happened over the last 60 years?
Well, we're just pragmatic about energy. And and a lot of people did, right? Everybody that understood the true nature, the real physics behind nuclear, they didn't see the media narrative shot up after Fukushima and just, let's just turn everything off, right? Because that was the wrong reaction. And, you see France and what happened in Europe with the grid going down. France was just kicking.
Yeah.
Buzzing.
They have like 20, right?
I don't know the number off the top of my head. I do know, though, that their energy capacity on their grid is about 95 to 97%.
Nuclear?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah. And they do the whole bit.
Mm-hmm.
They do nuclear fuel reprocessing. And so they actually have some version of a more near-term storage solution for their waste as it's being reprocessed. And I don't know if it's actually been scaled to full utility yet. But yeah, so they're where everybody ran. France stuck to their cojones and stuck with nuclear.
It's probably because they have two men as the president and then the first lady.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what happened there.
Exactly.
I don't want to get sued like that one girl from Turning Points and
Candace.
Yeah, I don't want to get sued like Candace, but
yeah.
What?
You might get her sponsor.
That'd be sick. Yeah.
She might see this and be like, okay,
yeah,
that's something I can get behind.
Yeah.
And I think this also goes into one of the things that we were talking about, propaganda and progress.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I've come to learn is that, especially in venture capital, finance, industry, all the markets in general, data does not always outshine the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, very, very often, the narrative wins.
That's why I studied economics, and I was just like, all this is bullshit because you're not taking into account like marketing and propaganda and all this stuff that happens around it. And I kept talking to my professors like, this is crazy that we're just thinking this like all happens based off these like 20 to 500 variables we assume, while not taking into the account of like media as a massive variable.
Yeah, well, economics and education, it's all a little bit too logical, right? Mm-hmm. It's not taking into account a lot of times the irrational behavior
of Latinos.
I didn't say it. I can't not say, but yeah. And so irrational behavior of human beings. And what was that saying? The markets can last irrational much longer than you can remain solvent. Mm-hmm. Not insolvent, solvent. And so, I mean, I think you can extrapolate that and apply it to just an industry versus, the people. Mm-hmm. And that's what basically kneecapped the nuclear industry.
And what do you know, like the single event or what happened in like the 60s when like the World Economic Forum like banned funding nuclear energy? Like, when did this cold start?
Yeah.
And why does it come back?
Yeah. So it happened for a lot of complex reasons. It was, again, narrative, nuclear weapons, nuclear weapon proliferation, nuclear energy. That was a lot for the layman to digest, right? And there wasn't I have to imagine the education back then on nuclear energy was probably not as caught up. All they had was probably history of, hey, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, atomic bombs. We're in game theory, mode. It's never ending with Russia. We're in the Cold War. And so just that fear kind of creeps up into the psyche. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, you have a lot of environmentalist NGOs, groups out there that were starting to spew this narrative. I mean, because they're ultimately more, it was like the hippie thing. They were more anti-nuclear weapons. But again, the narrative didn't allow people to bifurcate between the two, and there wasn't enough education to really understand. There was some who did, but then, okay, so there wasn't really a bifurcation of the education. People look at, oh, hey, yeah, nuclear weapons. Oh, if we have these reactors, somebody can, enrich uranium and make nuclear bombs, like that's how you think it. And I don't blame people. But then now compound that with Chernobyl. The terrible media poor handling by the Soviet regime, because again, Cold War, they didn't want to look stupid, so withheld information from the public, but then, or like everyone outside of Russia, and so they try to keep it a secret. It gets a little bit worse. Then they're like, hey, this is bad. Something bad happened. But even then, the reality, the real data, the hard data versus the narrative were completely, they weren't even in the same world. Mm-hmm. And I think a great example of that, if you've watched Chernobyl on HBO, you see I love television. I thought Chernobyl and HBO is just the best at writing. And when I first watched Chernobyl, my God, I was scared. Mm-hmm. It was such an eerie weirdness. But in reality, a lot of people, the numbers, the kind of, what actually took place, and I'm sure there was actual horror things that had happened at the time, but what was told to people, the message that was conveyed to people, it made it sound like there was another Hiroshima. It was that level of magnitude of fear. It was like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, except on accident, except a nuclear reactor. And so that spreads. And we don't have internet, or at least it's not accessible then. Actually, no, it's 1986. So internet, there's not the World Wide Web. The only people who know how to even connect to anything from a digital perspective or like
fucking the Midwest somewhere.
They're Bill Gates,
and Mark Andreessen,
Mark Andreessen and Idaho and Steve Jobs. So that information isn't there. The only thing you can go to is a library or your radio. And going off the radio, I don't know if you remember or ever heard about the first time the movie The War on Worlds was broadcasted.
Didn't people freak out like in bunkers or some shit?
People thought it was actually the end of the world. Yeah, actually happening.
Yeah.
So think about that situation, and then not too long after 3 Mile Island, even though nobody actually died from 3 Mile Island. That's the thing. The only nuclear meltdown that has ever happened in the United States, nobody died. I think a handful of people went to the hospital. Nothing in return happened. It wasn't anything like, oil spills and all these other things that have happened. But so, okay, coming back to my point, you have media, the narrative, it's so strong. And so nuclear energy, even though it is for the utility of mankind, it is aligned with nuclear weapons. And so people are trying to separate the two. but it's proving to be difficult. Then you have 3 Mile Island, then you have Chernobyl. And then on top of that, oil and gas was, they saw an opportunity to remove a competitor at the time. Oil and gas now was one of the biggest proponents of bringing back nuclear.
That's why I found it so interesting that Texas has 10%. That you would have thought that they would have very much made sure that didn't happen because it's their backyard.
Yeah. And Texas has been for a long time pro-nuclear. Our prior governor, Rick Perry, I'd probably give him credit for really sparking it. But at the same time, one of the most influential, not talked about too much, but one of the inflection points of the nuclear industry was George Bush, when he declassified a lot of the advanced reactor research, that I think it was like in 2006. So a lot of these files of all these other designs other than light water reactor or the pressure water reactor now were available to the public. That's another thing too, because that gives you another example, right? It was so contentious idea, even research that would have benefited the public to know. Maybe we would have had all these companies 20 years ago, but it wouldn't have existed because, those designs just didn't exist. And maybe you could work on those experiments. I think those experiments were only happening at national laboratories or somewhere in, Area 51 with the DOD. So aside from that, you had to have high level access or authorization.
What's crazy too is that the only thing that people associate, because of the media, the only thing that people associate George Bush and nuclear with is his inability to pronounce the word. You know what I mean? You go ask anybody on the street and they would make a joke, versus he's the guy who actually might have been the inflection point for this whole industry that might allow us to have sustainable energy into the future. Yeah. And so he did his part, but again, so George Bush from Texas, who was also governor at the same time, Rick Perry, who also Rick Perry, Secretary of Energy at the time. He was former governor of Texas. He actually was running for president at the time, but Secretary of Energy was what he landed on. And he was a big proponent of, hey, we need to, unleash atomic energy again. And then, so Texas has always been pro-nuclear. I think the only thing that is deviated is how much our government representatives could speak about it publicly, depending on popularity. Obviously, after Fukushima, we had to go quiet again. Fukushima was almost a death knell to nuclear industry. I mean, it was the death knell to the nuclear industry in Germany. And Germany now is paying for it in real time as we sit right here. So, but yeah, Texas, always pragmatic about energy, and we kept along, and we fulfilled our promise of, when the whole climate change discussion jumped up to the top of energy reform, we fulfilled our obligation. Nobody has generated as much. California has been competitive, but you look at wind and solar and just the trajectory of where it was going. Texas, we were going to lead outright. But yeah, so what would you say to somebody, if you had to go speak to a Texas representative tomorrow and he's 65, 70, 75 years old and he's like, nuclear, isn't that a bomb? How would you describe the difference between what we have today and then what a bomb is?
There's the nerdy answer and there's the non-nerdy answer.
Let's go non-nerdy to nerdy.
Yeah, I think because the non-nerdy answer is probably the thing that's going to be the most effective. It's just as simple as, hey, to even get to that level to produce a nuclear bomb, it requires an entire aspect of our supply chain. It's not just a dirty bomb that terrorists can get their hands on and all of a sudden, jerry rig and then boom, they have an atomic bomb. There is immense, like very sophisticated science and processes that go into making an atomic bomb. And that requires, one, for civilian use, commercial use, for electricity, uranium is enriched to 5%. We call LEU, low enriched uranium. To get to levels of enrichment where you'd make an atomic bomb is like 90 to 95%, and maybe even higher. And you also need plutonium. So
you don't need plutonium at all for these reactors?
These reactors do have plutonium. Plutonium can come out of a reactor, technically. A breeder reactor. We never commercialized a breeder reactor. But it's... Oof. That one is one where... I'm just saying this right now because it might have to be something I have to go back on. Because it is a little touchy point. But I'll keep on speaking because it could still potentially be used. So, yes. Plutonium can come out of a breeder reactor. We never commercialized and scaled breeder reactors. Breeder reactors were actually what we were supposed to scale back in 1960. That was supposed to be the golden triumph of nuclear. Light water reactors just launched and scaled because they were the first thing demonstrated, and sometimes first to the commercial markets. You demonstrate a positive outcome. Therefore, again, the narrative wins, right? Energy too cheap to meter, boom, there goes water reactors. And also, the Navy was doing, they had their Navy reactor program, and obviously Navy, if, water, surrounded by water, so it kind of just made sense. And the general who pushed nuclear into the scene, Admiral Rickover, obviously good friends with Eisenhower, so it kind of,
They won the contracts.
Yeah, they won the contracts. But, okay, so to go back to my point, yes, plutonium can be a byproduct in breeder reactor. We don't have plutonium coming out of any of the reactors right now. It can come out of reprocessing as well, one of the actinides. But then again, you still have to enrich to a certain level. And then there's a whole sort of mechanisms that come in to this. So I know that's crazy. That was the not so nerdy answer. It still takes some time to explain.
No, it's good. I've always been curious because I've always wanted to know.
Yeah.
It feels to me that both the futurists, let's say like the people building large like data centers and wanting to build, super intelligence or general intelligence, and the environmentalists who want like steady state economics and who want zero growth and blah, 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 they both seem to think we're on the cusp of an energy crisis, and their solutions for those are two different things. Like environmentalists like kill all the humans, or we shouldn't keep eating, or don't eat meat, blah, blah, blah. And environmentalists are like, let's go to nuclear, let's like get good energy. Yeah. Why? I don't think anybody on the street, if we go and say what's up to them, is going to be like, yes, we're on this precipice of an energy crisis. Like, what is going on? Why do we need all this energy?
Yeah, so there's, and I won't say purely environmentalists, and I say that because environmentalists have actually bifurcated into two different groups. There is a set of environmentalists that believe in abundance, and that is what they're going for. And there's groups like American Conservation Coalition, and other think tanks like Abundance Institute, and they're actually pushing for, abundance, a rethink, a more pragmatic rethink on how we scale energy. And then there's the traditional groups like Sierra Nevada Club, Greenpeace.
Shout out to the homies. I grew up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. So
yeah. There's a handful of groups historically that and NGOs that have been major proponents, not the sole inhibiting force. I want to correct that, but have been a big force in withholding the rise of nuclear. And so,
dude, this is like a weird personal story, but like there was this woman who she was either like worked for Sierra Nevada or for there's another group in the area where I grew up that is named after like a wildlife photographer.
Yeah.
But I remember literally after Fukushima, her coming to our classroom and talking about how she's taking iodine pills. And then now to fast forward to in California, right? And then to fast forward to today and to know that like only one person died like 10 years later from cancer from Fukushima.
Yeah.
Is crazy to me to think that like she was propagating this narrative to a bunch of 16, 17-year-olds who were like as if it was like completely true, verifiable, and you should be afraid and need to be taking iodine pills. Yeah. And then now looking back, it's like one person literally that was there on site died. Yeah,
here's the crazy thing. Everyone forgets that at Fukushima, there was a tsunami.
Yeah.
Like I don't it's just wild to me. And that's something that was very public. Mm-hmm. And Fukushima became a scare. Mm-hmm. And yes, there was some, like destabilized meltdown. I don't know if it would be considered a full meltdown. We considered it a meltdown then. But even then, doesn't that kind of show like how sturdy a reactor can be? A full-on tsunami this is terrible. Every life matters, mm-hmm. but only one person succumbs to what we thought felt like thousands of lives, mm-hmm. but no, most people just succumb to nature and the crazy force that it can be. Tsunami.
And even with the tsunami, I think there was some human error there, right? Like, didn't have the option of being able to do something, and then the structure of the Japanese government, they felt like they couldn't make the decision, and then so it wasn't made, and then
it was they had parts that were outdated, mm-hmm. similar to Chernobyl. Mm-hmm. Chernobyl that was part of the reason why Soviet Union, I won't say Russia today, but the Soviet Union then, or USSR, withheld information because it was the reason why the reaction, the meltdown, the explosion happened was because of cheaper parts. And they had different design of reactors. And something about the tips of the rods. And so it was just basically, as soon as those conditions, it had to be the exact perfect conditions for that kind of like blow off the cap. Mm-hmm. And even then, Chernobyl, not nearly as much people have died as it was said. Mm-hmm. And actually, this is crazy. And this is another thing that people don't realize about just nuclear energy, or actually just nuclear. Let's just talk about nuclear, not even energy. But a lot of people who actually had cancer, the data came out later, and that their cancer was in remission. Yeah. So a lot of and this actually points out an even more important point. And I try to tell my friends this a lot, who are just, smart in what they do, but they're not very, understanding of like what's going on with nuclear energy. They know what everybody else knows, right? For the most part. And it's that the medical isotopes, a lot of our cancer treatments, a lot of our treatment just in health, a lot of our equipment and medical devices, they're medical isotopes that come from nuclear reactors. So, I try to tell people, and this will definitely take some time for people to digest, but stop looking.
What's the half-life? Just kidding.
Yeah, you could do that. You could do that. Take a little shot of gin and some uranium. You'll have a great night. Mm-hmm. I don't know how long the rest of whatever is gonna last. Probably scrap that, but but anyways, no. But what I was gonna say is that we need to look at nuclear as what it is, a reaction that happens at the molecular level. Same thing as like what happens at combustion. the internal combustion engine. So when a plane blows up or somebody fly kamikaze style, do we say that we're going to stop using engines? Because that's what it is, chemical reaction. So like when bombs happen, do we say we're going to stop using ICE or anything else that requires a chemical reaction? No, it should be framed as more nuclear is just a more intimate and closer and better understanding of physics and a more intimate control of like nature. Like we're just going lower to the atom. And that's what's really happening. And so it's not just energy, it's not just weapons, it's all of the above. It can be used for R&D, it can be used for medical devices, it can use for us to actually colonize other planets. But there are so many other use cases. We were about to have nuclear powered batteries, that's been in R&D forever. Nuclear powered cars, like there are so many different use cases. So stop looking at it as one thing or the other, weapons or energy. It is an entire reaction at the molecular level, at the core of the atom.
So going back to the more aggressive NGOs in the futurists having the same idea, we're on an energy cliff.
Yeah.
You just dictated a world where we could have, infinite energy, basically.
Yeah.
What is holding us back right now? Or, why do we need so much energy?
Well, easy answer. 100 years ago, we were just 1 billion people. And then along the way of us becoming 8 billion population, we also got used to certain luxuries. Those luxuries require a lot of power. Along that way, other developing nations have been trying to get to the stage that we're at. Most of them were just born yesterday, but yeah, they will require a lot of power to hasten their progress. And we can do that with the technology today. They don't have to wait 300, 400 years like we did to get to where we're at.
Or don't have to pollute the environment with coal.
Exactly. But here's the thing, I don't blame them for if they do that, because it took us a long time. And okay, yeah, we have to decarbonize and a cleaner, safer path. But my thing is, I'm less so caught up on emissions, though I believe it to be important. I'm just like, hey, let's just rid pollution.
Yeah, pollution sucks. I think everybody can agree with that.
Exactly.
Like LA in the 90s sucked.
Yeah.
It's still kind of polluted, but it's way better than then.
Exactly. And so
Ryan, is that true? Yeah, okay.
whether or not, let's say global warming never even existed, we should still want to go to something more renewable, that's way more energy dense, that takes up a lot less of a footprint on land, that is less of an ecological disaster, like wind turbines, and that also the byproduct is something safely stored, and no other industry like nuclear knows exactly where every single kilogram of waste is stored and located.
This is one of the biggest kind of propagandists when people think about nuclear. They're just like, well, what about the waste? What about the waste? And you've worked with or for a company or advised a company that their whole goal was to do things with the waste, and you can do shit with it.
Yeah. And so that nuclear fuel reprocessing, again, nuclear fuel reprocessing, what probably held that back, closely aligned with weapons proliferation, as I mentioned earlier, that plutonium can be extracted, but it's the same thing as these advanced reactors, and some of them, the microreactors. The smaller they are, the more enriched their uranium has to be. So now you're entering HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium, that can be north of 5%, so 5 to 20%. And so you can see why that was an issue, and why a lot of those actual advanced reactors, as I mentioned earlier with Bush, why a lot of that was withheld, because to get to these more microreactors or more modular reactors, we had to, you would have to enrich the higher levels. Anyways, but reprocessing is something where you can take something that we consider as waste, again, we have no other industry has more insight and more understanding of their byproduct than the nuclear industry, not even close. And then you can take that and, attributing to your question, what about the waste? We can actually use it and we can reprocess and keep it in a feedback loop. And, after we reprocess it, you can power current reactors. You can supply feedstock to advanced reactors that use HALEU, and then medical isotopes, R&D, all the other things that I talked about, actinides and fission products that come out of it. And here's a kick. Now it becomes something, the more you throw it into the circular loop, that it turns out something that actually, okay, now we have just reduced the half-life of this radioactive byproduct that would have lasted maybe 10,000 years, but now maybe 100 or 200 or 300 years. But now that's something we can plan for.
Yeah.
That's feasible.
And you're something you can then also sell. So it's kind of like infinite money machine.
Yeah.
Because if you can actually imagine if we use solar as an example, imagine that when the solar panels on your house kind of shit after 10 years, that then turned into something that you could get gold out of.
Yeah.
If you can put it in medical devices, if you can put it back into the nuclear reactors, you can keep this feedback loop going.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, another reason why maybe it's so highly watched is there's a risk to it, but also there's a massive reward, and humans really like incentives.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think in general, again, going back to this idea of what an environmentalist really is, and maybe we're in a situation where we're altering that definition, or it's ever changing, but I would have to imagine it has to do with finding how to make use of waste. Mm-hmm. So making circular loops, closed loops of industry, taking the things that we threw away, and instead of them floating in some random part of the sea as junk, there's still a bunch of metals that can come out of that, and there are a bunch of items that can be reprocessed, refined, and used again. And I have a handful of friends off the top of my head that are working in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the areas where when I was studying economics, I was always very interested in some sort of waste responsibility tax, or because I think that we would have solved the trash thing a lot sooner, or the recycling thing. Yeah. And again, to me, the outcome is what I don't want is the pollution of our oceans and rivers. It's way doper when there's not a Doritos bag next to you in the river or the ocean than when there is. Yeah. And it's we would just solve that, then they would come up with solutions of ways to monetize that, just like people sell, I don't know, Boyan selling plastic ocean recycled blah blah blah, and there's some sort of brand narrative you can create around it. And if you just fuck it, I don't have to deal with it, we don't have to hire a new person to think about that problem. Yeah. There's no economic benefit for us to try and do that, because our product is really just the main thing we're producing. Yeah. But if the government could have just done a little bit of small taxation on forcing people to think about that, of their waste as a part of it, and not that the product leaves your responsibility as soon as it gets in the consumer's hand, I think that would have been really interesting. Because I did this crazy project in college where I convinced 6 kids to live in their waste for 8 weeks. So basically, other than the toilet, they had to keep every single thing they consumed, whatever was not biodegradable, they'd keep it in their rooms with them. Yeah. Or in their car. And so they got to see it pile up. And it's hard because at the individual level, they make the environmental movement so large that no individual can solve it. Yeah. But at a corporate structure, and you're oh, this is 5%. We can actually get 5% more efficient if we just solve this problem. Mm-hmm. And it's, the thinking of magnitude of 40,000 people or 80,000 or a city or a country or 100 million. It's dude, there's a gold mine here that we can actually go and pursue. It becomes very different. Yeah. And there's so many, I guess, diamonds hidden in the rough, There's entire industries that can be recreated or, disrupted or, born from waste. Mm-hmm. Another company, actually, Phoenix Tailings, I found out there's these, and, it's
it's always so surprising when I first find out about these things, but it makes a lot of sense. You know, it's like, okay, that's very obvious. But there's these things, tailings ponds, and it's just all the nasty waste and chemical sludge that comes out of like industrial sites and manufacturing of like physical technologies or components or, you know, automobiles or whatever. But and they're extremely toxic, you know. But if you get someone to come on and, or not if you get someone, probably scratch that, but now this company found a way to take from that toxic sludge, because in there's a lot of critical metals. What does the U.S. need right now? A lot.
Critical metals, batteries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of critical metals, not just for batteries, even just for the frames and magnets for chips and batteries and all sorts of other things. There's actually this very critical material, neodymium, that is utilized for magnets, that in every way that we live right now is crucial. And so you can excrete, or you can extract these metals from these ponds that are so toxic. At first we just left them there. But now when you create a way to take from what was once waste, now not only do you come out with a solution that is, one, economical because it was once waste, and now it is actually something valuable again, but then also you create a new process, you create a circular loop in where you can utilize that thing. And so whatever made it toxic, eventually, you know, if you just ring it through the system several times, it'll be a lot less toxic for a lot less longer. And so that's something that's, you know, I think, to me, that is true environmentalism. That is, you know, taking up as much of what you've used and using it to its full utility until it's not harmful to ourselves or the environment.
That's why I love Dune so much too, is because it does such a great job of deconstructing the book, not the movie, but of deconstructing ecology.
Yeah.
And how these systems can all work together, and how we can build technology to mimic the ecology.
Yeah.
We can learn from it, and then we can use that to actually rebuild worlds in like a cyberpunk way that we actually want to live.
Yeah.
And I hate when people get caught in these closed loops because like they're lazy or bored or they can, when really it's so sick to think about. You know, if you think about it from a media perspective, you record a podcast.
Yeah.
You can then take that from a 2-hour conversation and you can create 120 clips. From that, you can create, you know, 240 30-second stories.
Yeah.
From that can go viral, get remixed. You can take all that content, mash it up in different ways. And it's just this like crazy loop of kind of drawing attention to different ideas and different things.
LinkedIn posts.
Exactly.
And
it's like this infinite
visuals.
loop.
Yeah.
Which is sick. And then you think of even like Goodwill, right? Like I was dropping something off at Goodwill. And it's crazy how well they were able to build this company that basically takes people's waste and they immediately, from like one day to the next, assign value and it sells for money.
Yeah. I have a group chat, some nerdy guys. I guess a lot of my friends that are working on important stuff, and in that we have like a channel, entropy harvesters.
Hell yeah.
Earlier today, I was actually thinking to myself, I'm like, what is it, entropy harvesters? Because, you know, enthalpy is actually the heat, the energy that remains within a system. But then I thought, entropy harvesters actually makes a lot of sense. We're taking all the chaos, the chaotic, uncontrollable parts of the system that are leaving the system and trying to bring them back into the system, make them useful again. And really, in kind of this quest of gaining and controlling more and higher orders of energy, it's all about energy density. And so closed loop systems we're trying to maintain, we're trying to keep, you know, instead of the entropy that's trying to break out, we're trying to harvest and keep it within the system so that it can be useful.
This is where I think there's like a good like bifurcation of the futurist and the more like steady state people, because I think both are super necessary, but it feels like they seem to be, because they're both facing this thing, the fact that we now have 8 billion people on the planet. The problem is people become, I don't know if it's something to do with us having like 2 feet, or like why we just think that things are either black or white or one way or the other, and it's like they both can't exist and they both shouldn't be supported, because we need more energy and we need to be more effective with the energy that we have. And like we need both those things desperately.
I'm gonna go a little loony here on the response there. I think, and this is the same reason why do we crave negative attention, or not crave? Why do we respond to negative attention more than we respond to good stuff that happens around us? It's quite. I mean, if you look at the grand scheme, the line of how long we've as a civilization have been around, us becoming an intelligent species was like yesterday. Our neocortex, frontal lobe, our ability to actually think in a very intelligent manner and like draw from complex systems, it's very nascent. And so, okay, now you add that with, then we became like industrialists. Again, we went from 1 billion to 8 billion. We were probably like 100 million, 100 years before that, probably less. Most of us used to die on average at like 30 to 40 years. I know that's like
skewed off childbirth.
Yeah, it's anchored because of like
still our mean or median.
Yeah, exactly. Birth rate, but still, it was easy to just die for whatever reason. So not too long ago, even though we were more intelligent civilization or creatures or whatever, we still were very primal. And and I think now we're getting to a point where we're combating, probably now more than ever, we're combating our primal nature with like this more sophisticated thought. And to some extent, we believe that we need to reserve those things that allowed us to survive to get to this point. But at the same time, how can we enlighten ourselves to be better? And so that is the reason, that is the actual conflict. And then also industrialists in 100 years, third industrial revolution. I think we're coming on to a fourth industrial revolution. And that industrial revolution will have to include media, and we have not done a great job. That was, we were too early. I don't know if it's too early. I would just say it was inevitable. It was going to happen regardless. We kind of opened Pandora's box, internet. We were going to find ways to expedite socializing, finding your mate. And in that quest, well, we kind of fucked up.
Yeah, our ability to mature as a species has not kept up with our ability to connect with every single person on Earth at one time.
Yeah.
Like we are not culturally maturing at the rate it would take for us to understand what it means to be consistently online, to be productized as a human. We were just talking about a stat earlier where it was like 65% of Gen Z considers themselves a content creator.
Yeah.
Which in my mind, the thing that scares me around that is it means 65% of a whole generation thinks of themselves as a product.
Yeah.
Which I think has negative consequences that we're not totally aware of around their psyche and what it means to be human and what it means to have a community.
Yeah.
Is it like having a friend just a collab?
Yeah.
Does that mean when the views stop going up, you guys aren't homies anymore?
Well,
like you don't have ride or dies anymore because like the views went down?
Yeah. See, I can't even speak to Gen Z.
How old are you?
I'm 29.
29, yeah.
I'm in the lost land. I don't know. I mean, I'm technically millennial, but I don't feel millennial.
So you're 97
and
96?
I don't feel too old to be Gen Z. So I'm 95. So
95,
I'm
okay.
like, I'm in generational purgatory. But okay, so yeah, you're talking about just like maybe gamification of one's digital self, or productization of one's digital self. Man, we don't know how to, like, we're learning how to connect at a mass scale or what relationships are we supposed to, detach from our digital selves? But then we're still learning how to take in information, and again, propaganda. It's really, really hard, and right now media is so steered towards divisive issues. When things go well, they're not. You just know, you see, for instance, and this is terrible that this happened in New York yesterday, but the gunman, versus, hey, SpaceX, or maybe let's take away from Enterprise, but I promise you on that same day that maybe 10 or 20 or 100 people's lives were saved for all kinds of arbitrary reasons.
Tens of thousands across
tens
the world.
of thousands.
Yeah.
But here we're only focused, like, and that's just our primal nature. Like, we're thinking danger. That's the fear. That's the thing we're going to focus on.
And at the same time, my daughter rode on one of those little, like, things in the park for the first time. You know what I mean? That was lit as fuck.
Yeah, exactly. Like, great things happen. And so that's the thing. So from taking in news, taking in information, you focus a lot often on the bad things. There's some people who have kind of, they made their red line in the sand and they've gone great at it, but it's the minority of people. But most people, they see just bad things happen, and it's just hard for us to ignore that. But you can enjoy the good things, but usually it's more from a micro level. Like, it's detached from digital, and it's from, like, what's happened to you that day, but you specifically and personally, that's not going to be reflected on social media.
For sure. If you want to hear me and Andrew talk more about our ability to project fear onto narratives, the energy war with China, and the industrialization of America, go to skmp.supercast.com.